Okay, this is a whirlwind tour through some remediation notes. If you got a copy of these from me, it's because you are hoping to reassess a little bit at the last minute. So in addition to going through these, I would strongly recommend that you look through some of the videos, go through your notes, see if you can prepare and pass this reassessment. Okay, but let's just go through some of these concepts. And starting with the elements. Okay, elements are the very smallest building blocks in living organisms. Okay, we talked about the cycling of matter, and matter is made up of these various elements. Okay, some examples of elements are carbon, right, which we write as C, hydrogen, H, nitrogen, N, oxygen, O, okay, phosphorus, P, sulfur. Okay, we have a whole periodic table of the elements, and these are the tiniest Legos, these are the tiniest building blocks that are used to make things, right? Molecules and macromolecules in living organisms, okay? Which brings us to the point of what a molecule is. So a molecule is two or more elements connected together, connected by chemical bonds, okay? So for example, water is H2O, okay? That means you have two hydrogens and an oxygen. Okay, carbon dioxide is another one. CO2. All sorts of molecules. Nitrate, right? A form of nitrogen that can be used by plants. This is NO3. So you'd have to have one nitrogen and three oxygens. The unusable form of nitrogen would be nitrogen dinitrogen gas, right? And that would be N2, right? So lots of different examples of molecules. When you put several elements together, you get a molecule, okay? Make sure that you distinguish between, say, carbon dioxide, which is a gas in the atmosphere that can cause climate change and global warming, and simply carbon, okay? Carbon can exist as glucose, as cellulose. Different macromolecules have carbon in them, but carbon is not the same thing as carbon dioxide, okay? They serve two different purposes. All right, so let's move on to water properties. We talked about how water is sticky. How is it sticky? Well, it has the property of adhesion. That means that it sticks to other things. If you spray some water on a mirror, it sticks to it because it is adhesive. Okay? It sticks to itself. This is why it can make little droplets. Okay? Really big droplets sometimes. This is because of the property of cohesion. So water is cohesive, it is adhesive, and it can perform, or I guess it can exert, I don't know, capillary action, okay? Capillary action is when cohesion and adhesion work together and allow water to climb up narrow spaces or move through spaces with tiny holes, okay? In the context of photosynthesis and trees and ecosystems, this is an important feature of water because it allows water to be transported through the tree. Okay, and why do I say that adhesion and cohesion are involved here? Well, if you have a very tiny straw of sorts going through the tree, the water will stick to the side of the vessel, to the side of the straw, and it will also stick to each other. The different water molecules will, and that allows it to climb up the straw that goes through the trees. Okay. All right, so let's move on to the next part. Biotic simply means living. Okay? You might be asked for some biotic factors in ecosystems. Okay? Some examples of this might be animals, right? Humans, plants. Plants are living. Okay? Please do not say that plants are not living. They perform photosynthesis. They are absolutely living. Bacteria, right? Anything that is made up of cells, fungi. Okay? Those are examples of biotic factors. Okay? Abiotic would be the opposite of this, right? Non-living factors. Some examples of this would be precipitation. Okay? Okay, so this is the amount of water in an environment. Is it living? No. Is it important? Absolutely. Temperature is the same idea, right? Temperature, sunlight itself, temperature itself is not alive. Sunlight itself is not alive, but it does give rise to life and living organisms. So precipitation, temperature, altitude, right? Elevation. You could talk about soils and sand, right? We call this substrate. That is probably more than you need to know about that. But non-living factors in an environment. Okay, so here's some examples. All right, now the carbon storage versus emission story is as follows. This is overly simplified, but basically carbon, if it's stored on land or in the soil, this is a good thing, right? Okay, that means that it's a good thing because it's not existing in the atmosphere as CO2. So maybe we need to go there first. Carbon in the atmosphere is a gas, specifically a greenhouse gas, CO2. Okay, this leads to global warming. Okay, when you have a greenhouse gas, and especially at the amounts that we have in the atmosphere right now, you end up basically kind of creating a layer around the earth that keeps in heat. So we don't want carbon in the atmosphere. We have too much of it in the atmosphere right now. This is why we have issues with climate change and global warming. So if our carbon can be stored in things like trees, plants, animals, bacteria, right? Even humans. Okay. Fossil fuels are fine until we burn them, right? Until we combust them, then they become CO2. Okay. So we want to avoid as much as possible having carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. We have excessive amounts of this gas in the atmosphere right now. So if we plant more trees, then the trees will harvest the CO2 in the atmosphere. CO2 in the atmosphere can be harvested by trees through photosynthesis. Okay, so that is why we want to plant lots of trees, because it will take carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. Okay, let's move on. Alright, so some cycle names. When water turns to water vapor, think about a lake and having a mist rising up out of it. This is called evaporation. Most of you get that one okay. Alright, when water vapor cools to make clouds, this is condensation. Water vapor molecules are moving closer together when they get cooler, and this makes them visible, okay, but not quite heavy enough to fall out of the clouds. When the water vapor in the clouds gets even colder and falls out of the atmosphere, this is called precipitation. This can be rain, it can be snow, it can be sleet, all the lovely things that we Midwesterners get to experience. Okay, when water vapor is released from a tree, okay, this is also a kind of a form of evaporation because it enters the tree as liquid and it is released as a water vapor. This is called transpiration if it goes through a tree. Okay, we talked about corn sweat once. The corn sweat was an example of transpiration. Alright, fancy word for eating. Assimilation. This is when we take something in, like glucose or proteins or certain macromolecules, and our bodies know what to do with it. We break it down, we send different molecules to different parts of our bodies, and we reject the waste, right? We take out the trash later on. We take it in, reorganize it for our own purposes, and then get rid of what we don't need. That is assimilation. Okay. All right, when plants take carbon dioxide in to make glucose, right? Look at that. They're harvesting carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. This is photosynthesis. When glucose is burned in living organisms, it releases carbon dioxide. Okay. So maybe you would argue that this is a form of combustion, and you would probably be right. But this is cellular respiration. Okay. And if you think about it, when we respire, when we breathe, we have to take in oxygen, right? Fire requires oxygen. Anytime you burn something, when you oxidize something, it requires oxygen. So if we have glucose in our cells because we ate breakfast or we had lunch or whatever, okay, that glucose is being burned, oxidized in our cells, and out comes carbon dioxide and water vapor. Okay, a fancy word for burn is combustion. Okay, we use this like in our vehicles. We combust fossil fuels. Okay, if we have a bonfire, we are combusting logs, right? Some kind of fuel. All right, finally, the macromolecules that function as energy or fuel are carbohydrates. If you are a long distance runner, you might want to have a lot of carbohydrates the night before a race, so that your body has access to a lot of glucose. Okay, here's an example of glucose is an example of carbohydrates. Okay, and our blueprint for our cells. Okay, these are nucleic acids. There are only two examples of these. DNA and RNA, the N and the A stand for nucleic acid. Deoxyribonucleic acid, ribonucleic acid. Okay? These function as a blueprint for our cells because they tell our cells which proteins to make. It is essentially the instruction manual for our bodies. Okay? All right. The macromolecule that functions as enzymes that help us to digest things and make all these chemical processes happen, and also provide us with structural support. These are proteins. Okay, we will learn more about that later. Very important macromolecule. And finally, one of the macromolecules that you find most often in membranes are lipids. Okay, they're also found. This is another word for this is fats. Our brain matter is also very rich in fats or lipids. Okay, so make sure you understand the function. So how how do carbohydrates work? Why do we need carbohydrates? Why do we need nucleic acids in our cells? Why are proteins necessary for us, right? These macromolecules, these big molecules are needed for our cells. So why do we need lipids? Okay, and that's basically it. Okay.